a critical deadline for lawmakers and the country.
Things are looking good, very optimistic.
In Washington, plenty of hope.
I thought we made progress last night. We got to make more progress now.
But almost no time left. Failure to reach a debt deal is setting off alarm on Wall Street and intensity on the House floor.
Stop holding our nation's economy hostage. It's dangerous. It's unconscionable.
My message to my Republican colleagues is hold the line.
Can the sharply divided Congress compromise when the economy itself is at stake? Next.
This is Washington Week. Corporate funding is provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular's goal has been to provide wireless service that helps people communicate and connect. We offer a variety of no-contract plans, and our U.S.-based customer service team can help find one that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan through the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. I'm Lisa Desjardins. The United States, the world's largest economy, is days away from an unprecedented debt default and a toxic ripple effect across the government because President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy cannot agree on how to raise the nation's borrowing limit or debt ceiling. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced today that the nation could run out of money to pay its bills as soon as June 5th, giving the president, speaker, and negotiators slightly more breathing room to strike a deal and get it through Congress. One core issue, spending cuts.
It's really coming down to one thing. This has been about spending. The Democrats have never wanted to stop the amount of spending that they're going. They want to just keep adding and adding and adding.
Speaker McCarthy and I have a very different view of who should bear the burden of additional efforts to get our fiscal house in order. I don't believe the whole burden should fall on the backs of middle class and working class Americans. My House Republican friends disagree.
As a possible deal started to form this week, so did tension. A waterfall of speeches cascaded onto the House floor.
We're less than a week away from defaulting on our debt. We should all be outraged.
My colleagues on the other side of the aisle want more government. They want more taxes. They want more spending.
The two sides are so far apart that the House left town and loudly disagreed about whether that mattered.
If some new agreement is reached, members will receive 24 hours notice in the event we need to return to Washington for any additional votes.
You have presented our country with an impossible choice, devastating cuts or devastating default. And now you're sending us home with no resolution.
All this political brinksmanship is having real-life consequences as the clock ticks closer to debt, even if it is now more than a week away from the so-called X date. And at least 2 credit rating agencies this week placed the U.S. on a review or negative ratings watch. Joining me to discuss this and more are Farnoush Amiri, a congressional reporter for the Associated Press, Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent at the New York Times, John Bresnahan is the co-founder of Punchbowl News, and Francesca Chambers is the White House correspondent for USA Today. It has been quite a murky, confusing, and difficult month, I think, for all of us in Washington and for the country. I'd like to have a clear look for the country at this table, a clear look at the mud, shall we say. Brez, let's start with you. The $1 trillion, $10 trillion, $100 trillion question is, where are negotiators tonight? Where are we?
Well, they don't have a deal yet. And as your lead-in showed, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen put an X date, what they call the X date, today. And she established that it's going to be June 5th, which she'd been kind of fudging it. And I think that actually, it hurts and it helps both at the same time. It gives them a hard deadline. But it extended it by 4 days. And we all know Congress, if they have 4 more days, they're just going to talk for 4 more days, okay? So, but they, I talked to some senior Republicans on the way over here tonight. They don't have a deal. They're back in the Capitol tonight. They're still talking to the White House. They think they're close, but it's the last mile. They still don't have an agreement on spending. They don't have an agreement on spending caps, and they don't have agreement on work requirements for the social programs. The three big issues, they still have not resolved those.
Farnoush, what's your reporting? We've all been sitting in the hallways a lot together in the last week. What's your reporting tonight? And take us through this timeline. June 5th, is that now enough time for a deal to make it through Congress without sweating it?
I mean, even with June 1st, which is what we've all been operating under, it was going to be tight, right? I mean, the House has to pass it, and then it goes to the Senate. And the Senate, there's been Republican senators who have already, pledged to block any sort of spending agreement. Slow it down with amendments, as the Senate is already a slow process, slow it down even more. So the timeline was already looking really tough for both the White House and House Republicans. This does give them some breathing room, but as Brez said, Congress does not need more time because the more time they have, the more time they will spend negotiating. And this kind of gave them this okay, we have to get it done by this date, and now that's pushed that further along.
Peter, I saw you nodding when Brez said it's good and it's bad to have more time here. Are lawmakers going to relax too much here, or does this at least give them something concrete?
Washington only works when there is the currency of an urgent deadline, right? With the notion that you're going to fly off that cliff like Thelma and Louise, that's the only time they get anything done. And when you tell them, well, the deadline is kind of fudgy here, it's June 1st, now it's June 5th, they're not going to necessarily believe it. And the worry would be, okay, yeah, you say June 5th, but really you mean June 8th, don't you? Or maybe June 15th. If you get to June 15th, you get those tax revenues coming in. So really we could go until July or whatever, and you don't want to give them any room for fudging because then you really do take the chance that you head off that cliff without realizing it.
Francesca, is there a sense of urgency at the White House? There have been questions about who feels urgency and when. We've heard the president sound calm, everyone's measured, but we're getting down to it. What's it feel like?
No, it was pretty calm at the White House today. I was over there most of the day. I think that both sides, you can hear in what they're saying that they believe that they're getting close to a deal because you've already started to see the maneuvering now over who's won and who's lost as Democrats at the White House are laying out, well, we at least in theory will have spending caps through the beginning of 2025, a debt ceiling raised through the beginning of 2025. That puts President Joe Biden in a situation where he doesn't have to renegotiate this before the 2024 presidential election. So they're already trying to sell this as a win. Meanwhile, Republicans are highlighting the number of concessions that Democrats have already given out and calling it a win for themselves. So I think that that's how you can draw the conclusion that they're getting closer to a deal, is that they're now both trying to say that they're winning on this fight.
But what about the pressure on the Republicans so far? Wall Street really has not had a big reaction to the situation. Brez, should we be expecting Wall Street to act more, and will that change the results we see on Capitol Hill?
It would. I think we were both shocked. You had Pramila Jayapal, who's the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She was calling on Wall Street to bash Republicans. I mean, the irony of that, Pramila Jayapal calling on Wall Street to bash the other party, I mean, it was something. Right now, Wall Street, the market was up today. Yeah. Now, the debt markets, the interest rates, mortgages are getting more expensive. In the debt markets, there is definitely concern there. But in the stock market, it's not there yet. But I do think if we get into next week and there is not a deal, I do think we'll start, because we now have an X date, right? We now have, this is the Thelma and Louise. This is the car goes off the cliff, right? It's out there. Yellen has said it. It kind of sets us up like 2011 when you had Timothy Geithner saying this was the date. We got within 2 dates of it, and the market was upset. And I think if we get into next week and there's not a resolution of this, or it looks like they'll go past June 5th, I think you're going to see a lot more fear, I think, creep into the financial markets.
There's so much to talk about here. As you said, there's 3 big items that still haven't been closed yet, but the one that seemed to be getting a lot of attention today was work requirements. I just want to talk to you about that because it seems like both sides are digging in on that. Republicans said point blank today, no way in hell, one of the negotiators said, that he would give in on work requirements. You cover progressives. Is there any chance they're going to concede? And then how do they square that circle?
So I think that's what you see the tension between Biden and House Democrats over the past week. I mean, they have not been at the table at all in this, at least not in a way that we have been able to report or see for ourselves. And so this week you saw progressives take that into their own hand. They wanted to be part of the narrative. They saw Republicans coming and talking to reporters 5, 6, 7 times a day. The White House is quiet. Biden is not saying anything. So progressives and Pramila Jayapal wanted to take the narrative back into their own hands to be able to say, we are not going to pass just any bill. The president can't, this is what she told me today, the president can't just call us up and say, this is what we've negotiated, you're going to vote on this for me, the way that he did with Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill. Like, that's not the same progressive caucus.
And he's feeling the heat.
Today.
You can see he's feeling the heat, because what's fascinating is the president left, of course, for the weekend. There's a lot of criticism about whether he should have done that. He headed off to Camp David this evening, and as he's heading off to the Marine One helicopter, he says, I'm very optimistic. It looks like we might have a deal. We might know whether we'll have a deal as early as tonight. 27 minutes later, his White House puts out a statement saying, whoa, no way, work requirements, no way we're doing it. We're taking money out of the food out of the mouths of poor people to pay for tax cuts for the rich, suddenly laying down that hard line. Now, why are they doing that? Not because of the Republicans, because they're trying to signal to the progressive, yeah, we got your back on this. And the question is whether that's really blowing things up or whether that's just posturing for the purpose of the politics.
Biden is an optimist, though, right? Yeah. We know this about him. He is an optimist. And the White House has made the point repeatedly that every time he's discounted, he's able to work these things out. But that was under a different Congress. That was not under a Republican-run House. And one thing that you do see happening now is you're starting to see that whip count start. And you have Democrats like Leader Jeffries saying, well, we need to know how many votes you think that you're going to be able to get for us to know how many votes that we need to give you.
Let's break down that math. Yeah, Chris.
And one of the Republicans I was talking to tonight, Jeffries, was on another network talking about this afternoon, and this Republican was saying to me, the more Democrats complain about this, the better it is for Republicans, the better it is for McCarthy. He's like, every time Jeffries goes out there and says something bad about this deal, I get more votes. Now, they'll lose it on the left, and they still got to get to 218. But it's, the worse it is, if Pramila Jayapal and all these guys are upset, that's good for McCarthy. The other way around would be bad for McCarthy. So, it's going to be close. They're not going to be 300 votes.
Yeah, and they're whipping. I mean, Jayapal has been whipping against permitting reform.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
She's been whipping against work requirements. She's been whipping against spending caps. I mean, and they have the largest caucus of the Democrats.
100 voting members.
More than 100. It's like, I believe it's 101 or 2 or 3. So it's more than 100.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
There's
exactly,
a largest caucus in the House Democrat conference. And so if they say no, and some centrists who have been vocal about work requirements, they say no, the math, again, as I like to say, is not mathing for anyone.
Another topic of conversation this week that Farnoush alluded to earlier has been the messaging here. I want to show a bit of Kevin McCarthy, just one small fraction of the times that we saw him this week. I honestly lost count of how many times I was running into him in the hall. He was coming out and talking to us dozens of times during this week. There is an advantage to Capitol Hill. Obviously, we have far more access to far more people. Not that this table is split between White House and Capitol Hill correspondents here, but Francesca, I want to ask you: do you think the White House is aware of the idea that they lost the narrative game here early on?
So the White House is saying that the reason that you don't see them out there more is because they think that it would be hurtful to getting a deal for them to be negotiating in public. But as far as you were talking about the progressives, I was talking to one leading progressive in an outside group today who was saying that if they give anything more away at the White House, they do not think that they can get progressives on board with this deal. So trying to signal to the White House that they can't give up the work permits, they cannot give up work requirements, permitting reform, and that they need to draw a line here. At the same time, though, the problem is that Republicans would not have enough support right now for the deal if it stands where it is.
Peter, has the White House been out front? They're sort of playing a traditional game here. Kevin McCarthy's changing the rules.
Yeah. Well, look, Biden told us in Japan just last weekend, don't pay attention to any of this stuff. It's just theater, okay? I've been through this, he says, which of course he has been for 50 years. I mean, like, Brez and I have done a few of these back to Millard Fillmore or something like that. But this is the way it works, right? They go out and they fight and they argue and they posture and don't pay attention, he says, to the theater because we'll eventually get there. But at the same time, it's his own White House sort of playing the theater, right? But on the one hand, saying, don't pay attention, and then they'll come out and say something at the briefing like, look at these terrible Republicans. But they're more than happy to have Hakeem Jeffries do the dirty work, to have him be the one being the louder voice while they concentrate on getting the deal at the table. And then they'll try to sell it.
It took a minute.
McCarthy needed this, though. I mean, I think we'd all agree. McCarthy, this is the entire Congress. This was the biggest moment of the 118th Congress. And he needed this. After January, the White House and his own public standing was, the 15 votes, and he barely got there, and the conservatives, dragged him over the coals, and but they didn't think he'd pass a debt limit bill, and he did. And then he needed to do this, and they were smart about this. Biden is, he's old school, but it's, the media today is 24/7, social media. McCarthy and those guys were smart about it, and the House Republican leadership, they were smart about it. And by Wednesday, Thursday, you saw the Democratic leadership. They were really upset. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries and Catherine Clark and Pete Aguilar, they went out to the steps and just railed on McCarthy for like a half an hour. And we were told the White House didn't even want him to do that. So,
There's a risk to what the White House is doing.
Yeah.
The entire narrative has been shaped by Republicans, specifically, Garrett Graves, Patrick McHenry, and Kevin McCarthy.
Well, and the whole argument is on the Republican turf, right? The Democrats actually haven't come into this negotiation asking for something. They didn't come in asking for an increase in the minimum wage or more spending on this or that. They're playing defense on the spending we already are doing that they like. And the thing that they're getting in return is that the debt ceiling is raised. Well, that's not much of a gift if the country has to do it all along. So a lot of progressives are upset about that.
But that's where things have flipped this time. Usually, we've tracked these for forever. Usually, it's whoever's making the demands, which is usually Republicans, who loses in the eyes of the public. They are seen as hostage takers, but not this time.
But Biden has a different agenda here than the House Democrats. House Democrats need 5 seats, and they need chaos, right? They need McCarthy to fail. Yeah. And in this case, Biden needs McCarthy to succeed. He needs to raise the debt limit, as you say. And he
likes the bipartisan image that he has fostered, and that's important to him next year.
And he's tacking to the center on immigration. He did on the D.C. crime bill. I mean, he's tacking to the center. He's running for re-election. And they're not in the same place. Their goals are not quite the same here. And I think it's really interesting dynamic.
I will say on the messaging front, I think there's a risk to how public you negotiate this, right? Because the more your members start to find out what is in it, what isn't it. You saw McCarthy get defensive about that today, saying don't believe anything until they've seen it. This is why, Biden knew that if his members if House Democrats found out some of the things that he was willing or has been talking about budging on, that would not be a good look for them.
Right, and one Democrat telling me today, they see this as a C- deal, the way that it stands right now, and that they feel, another person telling me that they feel like they've got nothing on their side of the ledger. To go back to what your point was, what if Democrats actually want out of this other than lifting the debt ceiling, which is essentially what Republicans said the only thing that they were going to give them in this.
Quick question about Kevin McCarthy, though. It's all kind of a heat on Biden a little bit, but right now, everyone's praising Kevin McCarthy. Everyone's friends with him. They're all always very happy with him at this moment.
To a degree.
To a degree, exactly. Right. Is his job still potentially in jeopardy if he can't land this correctly?
He doesn't believe so. His allies, they don't believe so. I think, he passed the Limit Save Grow Act. Whatever you say about it, he got 218 votes for it, and he passed it, and he got to the table with Biden, which is where he wanted to be. Where he wanted to be all along. And he has, up until this point, you could say they fought the White House to a draw, and maybe even have an edge. Now, he's got to, like you said, he's got to land the plane. You're going to lose people on the right, no matter what. Tom Massey and Chip Roy, they're looking for reasons to vote no. To be honest, when they try to bring in immigration and other issues this week, they're looking for a reason to vote no or oppose it, or at least to go on TV. So, he's going to lose some votes on his right. There are a number of members who just won't vote for it. It could be their bill, and they wouldn't vote for it. And they understand that. I think they feel confident where they were. I don't think he feels like he's going to be challenged at all right now. But we have to see where the last 10 days will be the big ones.
I do want to remind our viewers, we've done this before, but it's important for us on this show to talk about the consequences of a debt default, or what happens if we can't pay our bills. Just a few of them that we would talk about: potentially 1 million jobs lost in the short term. In addition, there could be a possible recession if it were to go on for more than a couple of days. We could obviously see changes in our credit ratings. We've already had warnings about that, as we just reported. Likely cuts in Medicare, Social Security. We don't know what would be cut in terms of government funding yet. Military paychecks, among the many federal workers that could also see paychecks delayed. So we are all smart. We've all covered this a long time. Let's figure this out. What do we think a deal could actually look out in spending cuts, permitting, work requirements? What's the path here? We know 2 years of raising the debt ceiling, right? And some kind of middle figure for spending cuts. Is that right?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Well, the spending cuts depends on where you start your baseline, right? Do you say you're freezing it from last year's level or this year's level? And that's sort of one of the important
Where they're at right now is basically a flat line over fiscal year 2023. So you would see this 2-year cap, potentially some sort of a deal where in the second year you would get a 1-year spending increase. The difficulty about that is, one Democrat put it though to me, is that Joe Biden is an old school Democrat who likes to tax and he likes to spend. And this would really constrain him over the next 2 years for anything else that he might want to do.
Well, I mean, there will be there's going to be some carve out for military funding and veterans funding.
Do you think that'll be in the deal, or is that a handshake?
Oh, I think it has to be in the deal. I mean, there's no way. I don't know. I think McCarthy can't go to the floor without that. I mean, he needs his hawks.
Especially after what happened.
Especially exactly, and he needs veterans. He can't give that away. How they play the annual appropriations bills is going to be another thing that's a really complex mechanism. I do think right now they're fighting over the spending caps. They were going to do a 2-year spending cap. The Republicans want more because they don't want this to just snap back in the future. They want to argue that we've changed the course of government spending. We've really done it here, and you just can't be until 2020 of a wink and a nod, and Congress gets to lift it next year. What strikes me about this, and you talk about this, is that there are a lot. In 2011, we came close to default, but now there's some Republicans who treat like default as like a glorified shutdown of government, and it's not. This is as long as I've been covering Congress, this is like default was. This is the atomic bomb of.
Yeah, people should understand this is not a government shutdown. They've never seen this before. The things you described, they may think, oh, we've seen this before in a government shutdown. It's different than a government shutdown.
And global also. Those are just the effects here in this country.
The world's biggest economy defaults on a $31 trillion debt. That's not something that's happened.
We don't know what's going to happen. And looming in the wings is Donald Trump. Right, we didn't mention him tonight, but for Kevin McCarthy, one of the factors he has to worry about, and he's trying to manage that, is to keep Trump from blowing this thing up, or at least coming after him if he makes a deal, because he's going to make a deal, right? He wants to make a deal. Biden wants to make a deal. They actually want to show that Washington works, by the way, which is kind of oddly old-fashioned. And Trump, of course, want Washington to work. It's not in his interest.
But speaking of attention-getting things, is it just me, or does it feel like the country and even the Capitol, there isn't that same sense of urgency even for some of the government shutdown?
The fear factor is not there.
Why is that? Is this the new normal and we don't understand how significant it is? What's going on here?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, everyone has been saying the other side doesn't have urgency. I will say they all left for Memorial Day, so that doesn't help their case. Right.
I think it changed today with Yellen.
But
I think Yellen is.
Maybe
I mean, this was a huge moment. Yellen is saying this is the end of the world in 10 days. So
on the other end of that, I will say, as someone who's talked to Republicans, not just Freedom Caucus, who don't take any date Yellen gives seriously, I don't know if this helps in that. I mean, they were saying, oh, June 1st. That could be any day. And so now that it's June 5th, I don't think that'll help.
I've often wondered if that's a talking point, though, if that's just rhetoric that they're saying.
I saw her letter today. It was pretty specific.
No,
She's talking about
I mean, the Republicans that question that seriously.
No, I mean, I think some of them will seriously. It's the same ones that would never have voted for this, so it's not a big problem for McCarthy, but still concerning.
But this has grown over the last decade since the Tea Party. I remember the Tea Party guys. I remember talking to one. I remember back at that time, and he thought, default wasn't a big deal. Now you get to McCarthy has said we can, default. We can still pay our debt.
He wouldn't tell Biden, I won't let it default.
Yeah, I mean, so they see this as somewhat of a viable option, and there is very little. Yellen is not. She's not unpopular, but they don't believe
We have been through
her.
4 years when everything that was unthinkable actually has happened, right? In so many different ways. So that's why this doesn't seem quite as scary, I think, as it once did.
I do think we're a little bit numb to it because in the end, they always do get a deal, right? For the most part. No matter, it's always down to the deadline, down to the wire.
I know, we're talking about reporters are like,
I know.
We've had the longest government shutdown in history.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
We pay a price for it.
And frankly, look, I do think the Democrats got a lot of spending in the last Congress, and I do think they have a lot to defend. But that there's where we are right now is it is scary. I don't know. I mean, everybody's been scared since January. We're like, oh my God, we've all been waiting for this moment, and now it's here. And
These are hard
I think it's something to worry about. Yeah.
Very hard differences. believe it or not, we only have a few seconds left. I almost forgot we were on television. Quickly, do you think we're going to get a deal this weekend, including Monday, yes or no?
I mean, so before the X date was announced.
Yes or no?
No.
Yes.
No.
Peter?
Framework.
Framework. I don't believe
Take her answer.
That's great. All right. And we have to leave it there for now. Thanks to my panel for joining us, especially Francesca, happy birthday Monday, and for sharing your reporting. Thanks to all of you for joining us as well. And don't forget to watch PBS News Weekend on Saturday for a look at the mental health services available to expectant and new mothers as maternal mortality rates in the U.S. continue to climb. I'm Lisa Desjardins. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week is provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular has been offering no-contract wireless plans designed to help people do more of what they like. Our U.S.-based customer service team can help find a plan that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewens with the Ewen Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.